If you love stories about justice, courage, and standing up to corruption, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. This is a story of two ordinary brothers who walked into a storm they didn't ask for. But what happened next will leave you speechless. Stay tuned, because this battle is far from over. The neon glow of Danny's roadhouse flickered in the late-night mist, casting eerie reflections against the rain-slicked pavement. The roadside diner sat on the outskirts of Grayson, a small southern town, where everyone knew each other's business, but turned a blind eye when it was convenient. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of sizzling bacon, fresh coffee, and a hint of burnt toast. A quiet haven for weary travelers and truckers looking for a quick bite before hitting the endless stretch of highway. Noah and Gabriel Carter, two brothers who had spent the last few years serving overseas in elite military operations, had stopped by for nothing more than a peaceful meal. Their return home had been met with unease. Small towns didn't change much, but something about Grayson felt different, darker. They weren't sure why, but tonight they were about to find out. Noah, the older of the two, had the steady presence of a man who had seen too much, fought too hard, and come back to a world that no longer felt like home. His short-cropped dark hair framed a face that was unreadable, except to those who knew him well. Gabriel, the younger and more impulsive of the two, had an easygoing charm that masked the same battle-hardened instincts. Despite their casual appearances, Noah in a simple black hoodie, Gabriel in a denim jacket, they were anything but ordinary men. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, dipping between war stories, inside jokes, and talk of rebuilding their lives. They weren't looking for trouble, but trouble had a way of finding those who refused to back down. The disruption. The moment the diner door swung open with a violent creak, the atmosphere changed. Silence fell like a guillotine, conversations ceased, and the tension in the air thickened into something suffocating. A group of 6 men strode in like they owned the place. The Black Vultures. Everyone in town knew them. They weren't just a gang. They were a syndicate of fear, running rackets, shaking down business owners, and operating under the protection of the local sheriff's department. Their leader, Derek Slade, was a towering figure with a shaved head, a jagged scar down his cheek, and the kind of smirk that sent a chill down your spine. He paused just inside the entrance, sweeping the room with predatory amusement before his gaze landed on Noah and Gabriel. "Well, well, well," he drawled, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "Looks like we got ourselves some new faces." They weren't new. The Carter brothers had grown up in Grayson, but something about them had changed, and Slade could sense it. Predators recognized other predators. Gabriel sipped his coffee, seemingly unfazed, just grabbing a bite. Slade chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah? You boys look like you don't belong here anymore." The diner held its breath. No one dared to step in. The waitress, a young woman named Sophie, hesitated behind the counter, her hand trembling over the coffee pot. Even the cook, a burly man with arms like tree trunks, kept his eyes on the grill, pretending not to hear. Noah set his mug down, his movements deliberate and calm. "Didn't realize we needed an invitation." Slade's expression darkened, his ego pricked. One of his men, a wiry guy with tobacco-stained teeth and knuckles tattooed with skulls, leaned onto their table. Too close, too familiar. "Think maybe you ought to show some respect, fellas." Gabriel smiled, but there was no humor in it. Respect is earned, not demanded. The breaking point. The moment the thug's hand reached for Gabriel's shoulder, everything changed. A blur of movement. A sharp gasp. A table knocked over. In less than 3 seconds, Gabriel had twisted the man's wrist, forced him onto his knees, and sent him sprawling with a well-placed kick. The diner erupted into chaos. Slade lunged at Noah with a roar, but Noah sidestepped effortlessly, delivering a precise elbow to his ribs. Slade stumbled, shocked, as Noah followed up with a knee to his gut, sending him crashing into a booth. Another gang member swung wildly at Gabriel, only to find himself slammed into the counter, sending plates and utensils clattering. 2 against 6 should have been an impossible fight. But the Carter brothers weren't ordinary men. Every move was calculated, precise, honed from years of discipline. They didn't fight with rage. They fought with cold, efficient control. One of the vultures pulled a knife. Big mistake. Noah disarmed him in a heartbeat, flipping him over the table. The knife skidded across the floor, stopping at Sophie's feet. She stared at it, wide-eyed, before grabbing her phone with shaking hands. Slade, now bruised and humiliated, scrambled backward, his confidence shattered. "You're gonna regret this," he spat, clutching his side. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Gabriel exhaled slowly. "You're right." He stepped forward, voice low. "Dangerous. Because if you did, you wouldn't have started this." The aftermath. Just then, the wail of sirens shattered the air. The diner's neon lights reflected against the flashing reds and blues as squad cars screeched to a halt outside. Officers stormed in, guns drawn. "Hands up! Everyone down!" Noah and Gabriel exchanged a glance. Of course, it had come to this. They raised their hands slowly. The officers moved fast, shoving them against the wall, slapping cuffs onto their wrists. Meanwhile, Slade and his men received a different treatment. Casual questions, friendly nods. No cuffs. As they were led outside, Slade grinned, leaning in close. "You haven't seen the last of us," he whispered, his voice dripping with venom. Gabriel's jaw clenched. Noah gave his brother a slight shake of the head. Not now, but soon. Justice cannot be silenced. At the station, the interrogation was a joke. Every question framed their military backgrounds as a liability, not an honor. But they weren't alone. Calls were made. Friends in high places pulled strings. And then, the unedited footage surfaced. Public outrage erupted. The hashtag Justice for the Carter brothers trended overnight. The town couldn't look away anymore. Under pressure, the charges were dropped. The sheriff, now under investigation, had no choice but to step aside. And as for Slade? Federal agents picked him up 2 days later. The vultures weren't invincible after all. As Noah and Gabriel sat back on their old family porch, watching the sunset, Gabriel asked, "You think they'll stay down?" Noah smiled, slow and knowing. "No, but we're ready for whatever's next." Like, comment, and subscribe if you believe in standing up against injustice. This battle was won. But the war isn't over. The showdown at Hunter's Diner. You won't believe how it ends. If you love stories packed with high-stakes action, intense confrontations, and justice served cold, then hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel. This is a tale of 2 ordinary brothers, a fateful night, and the gang that had no idea what they were up against. Stick around, because this battle takes a turn you won't see coming. The neon buzz of Hunter's Diner cast a dim glow on the rain-drenched pavement. The place had been a staple of Silverton, a quiet, rural town nestled between stretches of empty highways and dense, looming forests. On the surface, it was the kind of town where nothing ever happened. But those who lived here knew better. It wasn't the weather making the night feel heavy. It was something else. Liam and Jesse Grayson, 2 brothers fresh off a long, grueling road trip, pulled into the lot. their truck's tires splashing through the puddles. They weren't here for trouble, just a meal, a little quiet, and a break from the relentless miles behind them. Jesse stretched as he stepped out, his worn leather jacket creaking. "Man, I could eat a whole cow." Liam smirked. "Let's start with a burger and see where it goes." As they pushed through the glass door, the warmth of the diner wrapped around them. The scent of fresh coffee, sizzling bacon, and something sweet, maybe cinnamon pie, lingered in the air. They slid into a booth by the window, the rain streaking across the glass like slow-moving tears. The place was half empty, just a trucker nursing a coffee in the corner, a couple whispering over their milkshakes, and the waitress, Rachel, who had a tired but friendly smile. They ordered their food, laughing over old memories, when the door swung open with a sharp, metallic creak. The vultures arrive. 6 men walked in, their presence sucking the warmth out of the room. The black vultures. Everyone in Silverton knew them. Bikers, extortionists, troublemakers. They didn't just cause problems. They were the problem. The law turned a blind eye, and those who crossed them regretted it. Their leader, Dane Caldwell, sauntered in like he owned the place. Tall, broad, with a leather vest stretched over his muscled frame, his long hair tied back, and eyes that flickered with cruel amusement. Rachel froze mid-step. The trucker hunched lower. The couple looked away. Everyone knew better than to engage. Except Liam and Jesse. Caldwell's gaze swept the room before landing on them. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice thick with something between amusement and threat. "A couple of strangers in our little kingdom." Jesse didn't even look up from his coffee, just passing through. Caldwell grinned, flashing a gold tooth that caught the flickering light. "That so?" His men laughed, a deep, menacing sound, like a pack of hyenas circling their prey. One of them, a wiry man with too many scars and too little sense, leaned against their table, inches from Liam's face. "Thing is, strangers ought to show a little respect. Maybe buy a round for the locals, huh?" Jesse finally met his gaze, his stare like steel. "We'll pass." A beat of silence. Rachel took a step back. The trucker glanced toward the exit, considering his options. Even the diner's jukebox seemed to grow quieter. Caldwell's smirk curled into something darker. "I don't think you heard, my friend. We're being polite." Liam sighed, pushing his plate aside. He turned his full attention to Caldwell. "And we're politely saying no." The room tensed. The quiet before the thunder. The first blow. The wiry man reached out. Bad move. Liam caught his wrist mid-air, twisting it effortlessly. The man gasped, dropping to his knees as a sickening pop filled the silence. And just like that, hell broke loose. One of the bikers lunged at Jesse, but he was faster, dodging and slamming an elbow into the man's throat. Another thug swung a fist toward Liam, but Liam ducked, countering with a brutal punch to the ribs. Dishes shattered. Chairs scraped violently against the floor. Rachel screamed. Caldwell pulled a knife, the blade gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "You boys should have learned some manners." Jesse smirked. "We learned plenty." Caldwell lunged. Jesse dodged, grabbed his wrist, and slammed his head against the counter. The impact sent plates flying, the knife clattering to the floor. Liam, meanwhile, was handling 2 men at once, his movements fluid and deadly. 1 hit, 1 block, 1 strike. A symphony of controlled violence. Within moments, the bikers were writhing on the floor, groaning in pain. Caldwell, bloodied but furious, pushed himself up, breathing raggedly. "You think this is over?" he spat. Liam tilted his head, considering. "Yeah, I do." But before Caldwell could react, The sirens howled. Justice? Or a setup? The police stormed in, guns drawn. "Everyone down!" Liam and Jesse raised their hands, chests heaving. But instead of arresting Caldwell and his gang, the officers cuffed the brothers. Jesse tensed. "You gotta be kidding me." Caldwell, now grinning despite his bruises, leaned in. "Welcome to Silverton, boys." The realization hit hard. The sheriff was in their pocket. Rachel rushed forward. "This is wrong! They were defending themselves!" And one of the cops shot her a look. "Stay out of this, Rachel." Jesse and Liam exchanged a glance. This wasn't over. The reckoning. The next morning, the brothers were in holding, their hands cuffed, their patience wearing thin. Then the call came. And everything changed. Unbeknownst to the sheriff, Liam and Jesse had friends in high places. Within hours, federal agents stormed the precinct, demanding the release of the Grayson brothers. Evidence surfaced. Security footage. Witness statements. And just like that, the house of cards collapsed. By nightfall, Caldwell and his entire crew were in federal custody. Racketeering, assault, extortion, the works. As Liam and Jesse walked out, Rachel stood waiting. "You really pissed off the wrong people," she said with a smirk. Jesse chuckled, stretching his sore wrists. "We do that a lot." Liam looked toward the horizon, the setting sun bleeding across the sky like fire. "Think they'll stay gone?" Jesse asked. Liam exhaled. "No." He looked back at his brother. "But we're ready. If you love seeing justice served, hit that like button, comment your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe. This was just one battle, but the war isn't over. Stay tuned for more. A night at Murphy's Diner turns into a fight for survival. You won't believe what happens next. If you love high-stakes drama, intense confrontations, and stories where the underdogs fight back, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. You don't want to miss how this battle unfolds, because this isn't just a fight. It's a reckoning. The neon glow of Murphy's Diner hummed like a beacon in the cold, lonely night. The rain had started hours ago, turning the cracked pavement outside into a shimmering pool of reflections. Inside, the air was thick with the comforting aroma of fresh coffee, grilled burgers, and warm cinnamon pie. For Elias and Daniel Mercer, two brothers looking for nothing more than a quiet meal, the night was supposed to be uneventful. It should have been simple. They had driven for hours, tired from the weight of the world pressing against their shoulders. The kind of weight only men who had fought their own battles could understand. Elias, the elder, carried himself like a storm, always on the verge of breaking, silent, brooding, eyes that had seen too much. His younger brother, Daniel, was the opposite. He laughed easily, carried the world's pain with a shrug, but underneath he was just as unshakable. Two sides of the same coin. They slid into a corner booth, stretching out the stiffness from the road. A waitress, Claire, her name tag read, offered a tired smile as she refilled their coffee. "Been on the road long?" she asked. Daniel smirked. "Feels like forever." Elias nodded, gaze flicking to the window, watching the rain patter against the glass in slow, deliberate streaks. Something about the night felt wrong. He just didn't know why. And then, the door swung open. The wolves walk in. The shift in the air was immediate. A group of 5 men stalked inside, their presence stretching like a shadow across the diner. Murphy's was a place for tired workers. Old men nursing black coffee, truckers with aching backs. But these men, they didn't belong. Their leader, Vincent Cade, carried the kind of arrogance that came with never being told no. Tall, sharp features, a smug grin that never quite reached his cold, assessing eyes. His leather jacket bore the symbol of the Iron Hounds, a local gang with a reputation for getting away with whatever they wanted. They weren't just trouble. They were trouble that never paid the price. Claire's grip on the coffee pot tightened. The truckers at the counter suddenly found their mugs very interesting. Elias and Daniel? They didn't move, didn't react. But something in the air between them shifted. Vincent's gaze swept the diner, predatory and slow, until it landed on the Mercer brothers. His smile deepened. "Well, well," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We got ourselves some new faces." Daniel leaned back, unfazed. "Just grabbing a meal." Vincent chuckled. "Yeah? See, thing is, you're sitting at our table." Elias exhaled through his nose. There were plenty of open seats. This wasn't about space. This was about dominance. Daniel's jaw ticked, but he kept his voice even. "Then you'll have to find another one." A murmur rippled through the diner. The tension crackled like a live wire. Claire took a step back. Even the rain outside seemed to hesitate. Vincent's expression hardened. Challenge accepted. The first mistake. One of Vincent's men, a wiry guy with too many tattoos and too little patience, stepped forward. His fingers twitched. Elias saw it before it happened. The slight shift of weight, the clench of a jaw. Then, the man lunged. In a blur, Elias caught his wrist, twisted it sharply, and sent him slamming against the counter. The diner erupted. Another thug grabbed Daniel's shoulder. Bad move. Daniel spun, elbowing him hard in the ribs before driving him into a booth. The man collapsed, gasping. For a brief, electrified moment, everything froze. Vincent's smirk had vanished. His pride cracked. "You think this is over?" he hissed. Elias, calm as ever, tilted his head. "That depends. You done?" Vincent's hand curled into a fist. He wasn't. The storm breaks. Vincent launched himself at Elias, throwing a punch meant to break bone. Elias dodged, grabbed the back of his jacket, and slammed him against the counter. Dishes shattered. Daniel ducked a wild swing, countering with a brutal uppercut that sent another man sprawling. Claire was screaming. The trucker had bolted out the door. Someone was calling the cops. Vincent, dazed but furious, stumbled back. His lip was bleeding. His ego was shattered. "You have no idea who you just messed with," he spat. Elias wiped a drop of blood from his cheek. Unimpressed. "Guess we'll find out." The cops arrive, but not for them. The sirens split the night. Squad cars screeched to a halt outside, red and blue lights flooding the diner. Officers stormed in, guns drawn. "Hands up!" Elias and Daniel slowly complied. Vincent, still breathing heavily, smirked. "You're screwed now." But then, "Down on the ground, Cade. Now!" Vincent's face blanched. The officers weren't here for the Mercers. They were here for him. Claire, shaking, stepped forward. "They didn't start this," she said, voice trembling but clear. "The cameras saw everything." The cops weren't local. They weren't on Vincent's payroll. And the evidence was clear. One by one, the Iron Hounds were cuffed and dragged outside. As Vincent was shoved into the squad car, he turned his hate-filled gaze on Elias and Daniel. "You think this is over?" he snarled. Daniel smirked, tossing a few bills on the table for their untouched food. "Yeah, I do. If you love stories where the bad guys finally get what's coming, hit that like button, comment your favorite moment, and subscribe for more. This night may be over, but trust me, justice is never finished. They thought he was weak, until he fought back. You won't believe what happens next. If you believe in standing up for what's right, fighting back against injustice, and seeing the underdog rise, then hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe. This is a story of resilience, courage, and the fight for survival. You won't believe how it all unfolds. Stay until the end. The night hung heavy over Benson's diner, the kind of small-town spot where the world felt frozen in time. The neon sign flickered above the entrance, casting a dim glow on the cracked asphalt below. Inside, the place smelled of grilled burgers, fresh coffee, and the faint trace of old cigarette smoke embedded in the walls. For Ethan Calloway, the night was supposed to be simple. Just a hot meal, a few quiet moments, and a chance to forget about the weight pressing against his chest. But fate had other plans. Ethan wasn't a big man. He wasn't the type to stand out. Not anymore. Once upon a time, he had been a fighter, a protector. But life had knocked him down too many times. He was just trying to get by, to stay invisible. He wasn't looking for trouble. And that's exactly why trouble found him. The men who thought they owned the night. The door swung open, and the energy in the diner shifted. A group of 4 men strode in like they owned the place, their presence swallowing the once warm atmosphere whole. The Red Jackals, the kind of men who fed on fear, thrived on control. Their leader, Roy Grim Dalton, was a mountain of a man. Broad shoulders, scars on his knuckles, and dead eyes that had seen too much. He scanned the room, and when he saw Ethan sitting alone at his booth, a slow, cruel smile curled on his lips. "Look what we got here, boys," Grim said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "A man all by himself. That don't seem right." Ethan didn't react. He knew better than to engage. The waitress, Sarah, a woman barely past 20 with tired eyes, hesitated behind the counter. She had seen what happened when people got in Grim's way. The cook, an older man with a grizzled beard, glanced toward the back exit like he was already planning his escape. Everyone in Benson's knew the unspoken rule. You don't cross the Red Jackals. Grim and his crew moved closer. Ethan could feel them before they even reached his table. "Didn't you hear me, stranger?" Grim said, gripping the edge of Ethan's table. "I'm trying to be friendly." Ethan exhaled slowly, then looked up. Their eyes met. And in that single moment, Grim knew. Ethan wasn't afraid. The breaking point. One of Grim's men, a wiry guy with greasy hair and a snake tattoo curling up his neck, leaned in. "Maybe he's deaf," he sneered. Then, he reached for Ethan's plate. Ethan's hand snapped out like lightning, catching the man's wrist mid-air. A sharp gasp rippled through the diner. No one ever touched the Red Jackals. Grim's smile vanished. A dark cloud passed over his eyes. "You've got some nerve, old man," he growled. Ethan released the man's wrist and calmly pushed his plate aside. He wasn't here to fight, but he also wasn't about to be bullied. "Leave," Ethan said. His voice was low, steady. Grim let out a slow, deep chuckle. Then his fist shot forward. Ethan dodged. Just barely. The force of the punch splintered the wooden table where his head had been seconds ago. The diner erupted into chaos. The fight no one saw coming. Before Grim could recover, Ethan was already moving. He ducked low, drove his shoulder into Grim's gut, sending the bigger man crashing into another booth. Dishes shattered. The walls trembled. The Jackals hesitated. For the first time in their miserable lives, they weren't sure they could win. But they tried. The wiry man lunged first, Ethan sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and twisted it with a sharp crack. The man screamed, crumpling to the ground. Another thug grabbed a chair, swinging it wildly. Ethan dodged, then drove a brutal elbow into his chest. The thug collapsed, gasping for air. And then, Grim was back on his feet. Blood trickled from his mouth. His pride had taken a hit, and now he was out for blood. With a roar, Grim charged like a bull. Ethan stood his ground. At the last second, Ethan sidestepped and slammed his fist into Grim's ribs. Once, twice, 3 times. The giant stumbled, swayed, then dropped to his knees. The reckoning. A deep silence settled over the diner. The jackals who were still conscious scrambled to grab their fallen leader. Grim's breath was ragged, his eyes wild. "This isn't over," he spat. Ethan, still calm, wiped the blood from his knuckles with a napkin. "Yes, it is." The red jackals staggered out of the diner, their reign of fear shattered. The moment the door swung shut behind them, the room erupted. The truckers cheered. Sarah laughed, half in shock, half in relief. The cook, still gripping his spatula, shook his head. "Well, I'll be damned." Ethan sat back down, exhaling slowly. His food was cold now. Sarah approached cautiously, holding the coffee pot. Her hands were still shaking. "More coffee?" she asked. Ethan smiled for the first time that night. "Please, if you loved seeing the underdog fight back, smash that like button and subscribe." Ethan may have won this battle, but some fights never truly end. Stay tuned for more stories where justice is earned, not given. The night they picked the wrong man. You won't believe how this ends. If you believe in standing up for yourself, never backing down, and justice prevailing, then hit that like button, comment to support the character, and subscribe. This is a story of resilience, courage, and a night that no one will ever forget. Stay until the end. You won't want to miss this. The rain drizzled steadily against the cracked pavement outside Sammy's diner, turning the neon glow of its sign into a shimmering blur against the night. Inside, the warmth of the small-town diner contrasted the chill outside, filled with the familiar scent of coffee, bacon grease, and fresh apple pie. It was the kind of place where weary truckers found comfort, where lonely souls sought a quiet moment, and where people knew when to mind their own business. For Caleb Monroe, tonight was just another night. Or so he thought. Sitting alone in a booth by the window, he sipped his coffee, lost in thought. A man with a past he wasn't proud of, but one he carried all the same. His broad shoulders and rough hands spoke of years spent fighting battles he didn't always win. Tonight, he wanted nothing more than a quiet meal, a brief escape from the memories that refused to let him rest. But peace was never meant to last. The wolves walk in. The diner door swung open with a sharp creak, and the atmosphere changed. 4 men stepped inside, their presence swallowing the warmth in an instant. The Iron Hounds. Everyone knew them. A gang that thrived on fear, on control, on making sure no one ever told them no. Their leader, Derek Razor Lowe, was a man who carried cruelty like a second skin. Tall, built like a brick wall, with dark, predatory eyes that scanned the diner with slow amusement. He lived for the power he held over people, the way they shrank under his gaze, the way they pretended not to see him. And then, his eyes landed on Caleb. His smirk deepened. "Well, well," he drawled, loud enough for everyone to hear. Ain't seen you around here before. Caleb said nothing, just took another sip of his coffee, steady, unreadable. Razor and his crew moved closer. The waitress, Ellie, stiffened behind the counter. The truckers at the booths shrank lower in their seats. The silence in the diner wasn't just tense. It was suffocating. One of Razor's men, a wiry guy with a scar cutting across his jaw, leaned against Caleb's table. Too close. Too familiar. Maybe he's shy, Scar sneered. Or maybe he needs some help understanding where he is. Razor chuckled, the kind of laugh that made the air feel thick. Caleb exhaled slowly. He wasn't looking for trouble. But trouble had found him. The breaking point. Razor pulled out the chair across from Caleb and dropped into it, grinning like a cat playing with its food. You see, stranger, he said, lacing his fingers together. Me and my boys, we don't take kindly to people who don't show respect. Caleb met his gaze, unmoving, unshaken. Respect is earned. The grin faltered. Just a fraction. Then, faster than anyone expected, Razor grabbed Caleb's coffee and dumped it onto the floor. Ellie gasped. A trucker muttered a curse under his breath. A line had been crossed. Caleb set his cup down. Slow. Deliberate. You shouldn't have done that, he said, his voice calm. Too calm. Razor chuckled. Oh yeah? He reached for Caleb's shoulder, and that's when everything changed. The fight that no one saw coming. In a blink, Caleb's hand shot out, grabbing Razor's wrist with an iron grip. The gang leader's cocky smirk vanished. Pain flickered in his eyes. Caleb didn't hesitate. He twisted Razor's arm with a precision that sent the man crashing onto the table, face first. The diner erupted into chaos. Scar lunged first. Caleb dodged, grabbed him by the back of the head, and slammed him into the counter. Another thug swung wildly. Caleb ducked, landed a brutal elbow to his ribs, then sent him sprawling with a sharp kick to the knee. Dishes shattered. A booth toppled over. The fight was quick, brutal, and over in seconds. And Razor? He was still gasping on the floor, stunned, humiliated. The reckoning. Caleb loomed over him, breath steady, fists clenched. Get up, he said, voice low. Dangerous. Razor staggered to his feet, shaking with fury. You're dead, old man, he spat. Caleb smirked, then come try. For a second, just a second, Razor considered it. Then the door swung open. The sheriff. The diner froze. The officer scanned the scene. Broken dishes, groaning men, Caleb standing tall. Ellie, shaking, stepped forward. They started it, she blurted out. The sheriff's gaze locked on Razor and his men. Cold. Calculating. Razor, suddenly aware of how bad this looked, wiped his bleeding lip. It was just a misunderstanding, he muttered. The sheriff crossed his arms. Looks to me like you lost. The gang leader tensed. His reign of terror had just cracked. But he had one last card to play. This ain't over, he whispered to Caleb, his voice low, seething. You got lucky. Caleb tilted his head. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Luck had nothing to do with it. If you love seeing the underdog fight back, drop a comment to support Caleb and hit that like button. He may have won this round, but the fight for justice is never over. Subscribe for more stories where courage and strength take center stage. The night everything changed. You won't believe how they fought back. If you love stories of redemption, resilience, fighting against impossible odds, then hit that like button, drop a comment to support the characters, and subscribe. This is a tale of courage, survival, and a night that tested everything they believed in. Stay until the end, because this battle is only the beginning. The town of Harlow Creek was the kind of place where people whispered about trouble, but never did anything to stop it. Fear was currency, and the ones who held it the longest controlled everything. That night, the rain poured relentlessly against the roof of Maggie's diner, drowning the streets in shimmering reflections. Inside, the warm glow of the overhead lights cast long shadows across the linoleum floors. The scent of buttery pancakes and black coffee lingered in the air, but tonight it couldn't mask the tension creeping in through the front door. For Logan and Cassie Bennett, this was just supposed to be a pit stop, a meal, a moment to breathe. But fate had other plans. The arrival of the devil. The first sign of trouble was the silence. A hush fell over the diner as the door swung open, allowing the cold wind to slither inside. 4 men strode in like they owned the place. The Hollow Fangs. Their name alone was enough to make the townspeople tense. A gang that didn't just break the rules, they made them. At the center of them was their leader, Tobias "Tuck" Mercer, a man who had turned Harlow Creek into his personal hunting ground. Broad-shouldered, scarred knuckles, and eyes filled with the kind of hunger that fed on weakness. Logan barely looked up from his coffee. He had seen men like this before. Cassie, however, did. She felt the shift in the room. The way the waitress, an older woman named Maggie, hesitated near the counter, her fingers gripping the edge just a little too tightly. Everyone was waiting for the wolves to pick their prey. And then it happened. Tuck's gaze landed on a young man sitting at the counter. Benji Lawson. The kid couldn't have been more than 19. He had the nervous energy of someone who had never learned how to fight back. Tuck grinned, slow and deliberate. "You owe me, Lawson." Benji's face went pale. His hands trembled around his coffee mug. I don't have it," he stammered. Tuck exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Now that's disappointing." The moment his hand shot out, grabbing Benji by the collar, Logan moved. The moment that changed everything. The diner erupted. Before Tuck could land a blow, Logan grabbed his wrist, twisting it just enough to make him let go. A sharp gasp echoed through the room. No one had ever dared to touch Tuck Mercer. The gang leader's face darkened. A slow, dangerous smirk crept onto his lips. Well, he muttered, flexing his fingers. "We got ourselves a hero." Logan didn't flinch, didn't move. "Walk away," he said, his voice calm, controlled. Deadly. Tuck's men laughed. One of them, a wiry guy with tattoos up his neck, took a step forward. "Big mistake, stranger." Cassie, who had been watching with silent precision, finally stood. And that's when everything exploded. The fight they never expected. The first punch came fast. Tuck swung at Logan, but he dodged, countering with a brutal jab to the ribs. Cassie wasn't just watching anymore. She was in it. A second man lunged at her, but she ducked under his arm, twisting his wrist so hard he yelped. She didn't stop. A sharp elbow to his gut, and he was down. Dishes crashed. The cook cursed. Tuck, furious, grabbed a knife from a nearby table. "You just signed your death sentence," he hissed. Logan's pulse remained steady. He had been in worse fights, against worse men. Tuck lunged, the blade catching the overhead light. And Logan caught his wrist mid-air. Twist, slam, crack. The knife clattered to the floor. Tuck roared in pain, staggering back. Cassie knocked out the last thug, sending him crashing into the counter. And just like that, the Holofangs were on the ground. For the first time in years, they weren't in control. The reckoning. Tuck, now breathless and bruised, wiped blood from the corner of his mouth. "This ain't over," he spat. Logan met his glare, unmoving, unbreakable. "It is," he said. "You just don't know it yet." And then, the sirens. Squad cars screeched to a stop outside, their red and blue lights flooding the diner. The law had finally arrived. The sheriff stepped inside, but this time, he wasn't looking at Logan. He was looking at Tuck. And Tuck knew. He had ruled this town for years, but tonight, his power had cracked. The aftermath. As the Holofangs were dragged out, the diner remained silent. Then, slowly, applause. Maggie smiled for the first time that night. Benji, still shaking, mumbled a soft, "Thank you." Cassie sat down, rolling her sore shoulder. Logan exhaled, finally taking a sip of his now cold coffee. "Damn," he muttered. "Could have at least let me finish my meal first." Cassie laughed, and for the first time in a long time, it felt real. If you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button and comment to support Logan and Cassie. This battle may be over, but their fight is far from finished. Subscribe for more stories where the strong protect the weak, and justice always finds a way. They thought they could break him, but he fought back. If you believe in fighting for what's right, pushing through impossible odds, and never backing down, then hit that like button, drop a comment to support the character, and subscribe. This is a tale of resilience, redemption, and one night that changed everything. Stay until the end. You won't believe how this battle unfolds. A town that lived in fear. The rain poured steadily over Ashwood, a town that had long since learned to keep its head down. Trouble had a name here. The Black Talons. They ruled the streets, took what they wanted, and answered to no one. People whispered about them, but never spoke too loudly. Fear was their currency, and business was booming. That night, the neon glow of Rosie's diner flickered weakly in the storm. Inside, the scent of fresh coffee, fried bacon, and warm apple pie should have been comforting. But tension sat heavier than the humidity in the air. At a booth near the window sat Jack Turner, a man who had already lost everything once. A former Marine, dishonorably discharged. A man who had seen hell, survived it, and yet still felt like he was drowning. All he wanted was to be left alone. But fate had other plans. The wolves walkin', the diner door slammed open, and the air turned to ice. 6 men stepped inside, their presence swallowing the warmth. At the head of them was Grant Kessler, leader of the Black Talons, sharp-eyed, broad-shouldered, and wearing the smug grin of a man who thought he was untouchable. The diner fell silent. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Rosie, the owner, paled behind the counter, gripping the coffee pot so hard her knuckles turned white. The cook, a burly man with a stained apron, took an unconscious step backward. And Jack? He didn't move. Kessler's gaze landed on him, and the smirk grew. "Well, well," he drawled. "Look what we got here." His men chuckled, their laughter thick with menace. Jack said nothing. He had played this game before. He knew what was coming. "See, stranger," Kessler continued, pulling out a chair and flipping it backward before straddling it. "This town has rules, and rule number 1, you don't sit where you don't belong." The challenge hung in the air. Heavy, dangerous. Jack finally lifted his gaze, his expression unreadable. "I'm just here for coffee," Kessler grinned. No, son, you're here for a lesson. And then, he grabbed Jack's coffee and dumped it onto the floor. The breaking point. The room froze. The waitress, Emily, sucked in a sharp breath. A trucker at the counter turned away, pretending he hadn't seen. Everyone knew what happened next. Jack stared at the spilled coffee for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he set his hands on the table. You shouldn't have done that, he murmured. Kessler's smirk widened. Oh yeah? Jack moved before anyone saw it coming. In a blink, he grabbed Kessler's wrist and twisted, fast, brutal, and precise. The gang leader roared in pain, crashing to his knees as Jack bent his arm back at an unnatural angle. The diner erupted into chaos, a fight they never saw coming. One of Kessler's men lunged, swinging a fist. Jack ducked, countering with an elbow to the ribs that sent the thug gasping. Another grabbed a chair. Jack kicked his knee out before the swing connected, sending him sprawling to the ground. Plates shattered. A table overturned. Emily screamed. Kessler, still kneeling, finally wrenched free, panting. His fury burned like wildfire. You think this is over? He spat. You have no idea who you just crossed. Jack exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Then come teach me. Kessler lunged. He was big, strong, but sloppy. Jack sidestepped, landed a precise jab to his throat, then swept his legs out from under him. Kessler hit the floor hard. And just like that, the Black Talons had been humiliated. For the first time in years, they weren't in control. The reckoning. Kessler coughed, wiping blood from his lip. His pride had shattered, and it showed. This ain't over, he rasped. Jack leaned down, voice low, steady. It is. You just don't know it yet. And then, the sirens. Squad cars screeched to a stop outside, red and blue lights flooding the diner. The law had finally come knocking. The sheriff stepped inside, but this time he wasn't looking at Jack. He was looking at Kessler. And Kessler knew. His time was up. A new beginning. As the gang was dragged out, the diner remained silent. Then, slowly, tentatively, a round of applause. Rosie exhaled, pressing a hand to her heart. I never thought I'd see the day. Emily wiped a tear from her cheek, smiling shakily. You just changed everything. Jack took a breath. He hadn't planned on being a hero. But tonight, he had made a choice. And choices. They change everything. If you believe in standing up for what's right, drop a comment to support Jack and hit that like button. This may be the end of the fight, but it's just the beginning of a new chapter. Subscribe for more stories where courage, resilience, and justice take center stage. They thought he was just a nobody, but he became their worst nightmare. If you believe in standing up to injustice, fighting back when it counts, and never giving up, then hit that like button, drop a comment to support the character, and subscribe. This is a tale of survival, courage, and one night that changed everything. Stay until the end, because this battle is far from over. A town on the edge. The small town of Rivermill wasn't what it used to be. Once a peaceful place, it had become a hunting ground for men who believed fear was stronger than the law. The kind of men who walked into a diner, took what they wanted, and left without paying a price. That night, the rain lashed against the streets, making the neon sign of Harvey's Diner flicker against the puddles. Inside, the warmth of buttered pancakes, sizzling bacon, and fresh coffee should have been comforting. But it wasn't. Not tonight. At a booth near the back, Mason Holt sat alone, watching the world move around him. A man with a past that no one knew, scars that no one saw, and a silence that most mistook for weakness. He wasn't looking for trouble. But trouble, it was looking for him. The shadows. Step in. The moment the diner door swung open, the air turned heavy. Everyone inside knew who had just walked in. The Hollow Men, a gang of ruthless criminals who ran Rivermill like it was their own personal playground. Extortion, threats, violence, it was all in a night's work. At the head of them was Colt Reynolds, a man with a jagged scar down his cheek and a stare that could turn a man's blood cold. The diner went silent. Harvey, the owner, swallowed hard behind the counter. The waitress, Lena, gripped the coffee pot like a lifeline. Mason, unmoving, watched it all. Colt's gaze swept the room, his smirk widening as he spotted a man at the counter. Eddie Barker. A mechanic. A father. A man who had borrowed money from the wrong people. Colt strode over, slamming a hand on Eddie's shoulder. "I believe we got unfinished business." Eddie flinched. He had nothing left to give. "I just need more time," Colt sighed, shaking his head. "You had time." Then he grabbed Eddie by the collar, yanking him from his seat. The diner held its breath. And that's when Mason stood, the line drawn in blood. Colt's eyes flicked to him. "And who the hell are you?" Mason's voice was calm, steady. "Let him go." Colt laughed. His men chuckled too. The whole diner knew what came next. "Mason?" He just kept looking at Colt, his expression unreadable. Colt's smirk faded. Something in Mason's gaze unsettled him. Then, in a flash, Colt swung. Mason dodged effortlessly, twisting Colt's arm before slamming him face-first into the counter. The diner exploded into chaos, a fight they never expected. One of Colt's men lunged. Mason sidestepped, driving a brutal fist into his ribs. Another thug grabbed a chair. Mason kicked it out of his hands, sending the man crashing onto the floor. Colt, stunned and furious, staggered back. "You don't know who you're messing with," he snarled. Mason cracked his knuckles. "You keep saying that." Colt charged. Mason didn't hesitate. One punch to the throat, a kick to the knee, a sharp elbow to the jaw. Colt hit the floor, hard, and suddenly the Hollow Men weren't so fearless anymore. The reckoning. Colt gasped, struggling to push himself up. His pride lay shattered across the linoleum. "This isn't over," he spat. Mason exhaled slowly. He had heard those words before. Then, the sirens. Squad cars skidded to a stop outside. The law had arrived. The sheriff stormed in, his gaze scanning the scene. Colt and his men, beaten and broken. Mason, standing tall. Harvey spoke first. "They started it." Lena nodded, stepping forward. "We saw everything, and for once, the law didn't turn a blind eye. One by one, the Hollow Men were dragged away. And Colt? He knew. His reign of terror had just ended. A new path. The diner was silent as the last squad car pulled away. Then, slowly, hesitantly, applause. Harvey clapped Mason on the shoulder. "Hell of a thing you did tonight." Eddie, shaken but alive, swallowed hard. "Thank you." Mason nodded. He hadn't come here to be a hero. But tonight, he had made a choice. And choices, they change everything. If you believe in fighting for what's right, drop a comment to support Mason and hit that like button. This may be the end of the fight, but some battles never truly end. Subscribe for more stories where justice is earned, not given. When they pushed him too far, he fought back. If you believe in fighting for justice, standing strong against oppression, and never backing down, then hit that like button. Drop a comment to support the character, and subscribe. This is a story of courage, redemption, and one night that changed everything. Stay until the end, because some battles are worth fighting. A town on the brink. The storm had been brewing for years in Hudson Creek. A town once filled with honest workers and small businesses had slowly been choked by the grip of the red vultures. A gang that didn't just take what they wanted. They destroyed anyone who dared to resist. That night, the neon glow of Miller's Diner flickered against the rain-drenched pavement. Inside, the scent of bacon, burnt toast, and cheap coffee mixed with the heavy tension hanging in the air. No one spoke too loudly. No one made eye contact. Because everyone knew who owned this town now. At a booth in the corner sat Gabe Lawson, a man who had been fighting battles long before the town lost its own. A man who had once been a protector, now just trying to survive. He stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, staring at the rain streaking down the window, his reflection barely recognizable in the glass. Tonight, he was just another customer. Or so he thought, because trouble was coming. And this time, he wouldn't run from it. The wolves enter the room. The diner door slammed open, letting in a gust of wind and the unmistakable presence of predators. The room stiffened. 5 men stepped inside, drenched in arrogance. The red vultures. At their center was Ray Maddox, the enforcer, the one who made examples out of those who forgot their place. The waitress, Anna, froze behind the counter. Harold, the old trucker nursing his coffee, hunched his shoulders. No one moved. No one wanted to be noticed. Ray's eyes scanned the room until they landed on Gabe. A slow, cruel smile crept onto his lips. "Well, well," Ray said, his voice dripping with amusement. "Look what we got here." Gabe didn't move, didn't flinch. Ray pulled out a chair and dropped into it, staring Gabe down like a cat playing with its food. "You're sitting in the wrong seat, old man." A low chuckle rippled through the gang. Gabe took a slow sip of his coffee. Unshaken. Unimpressed. "I didn't see your name on it." Ray's grin faltered. A flicker of something dangerous passed through his eyes. The diner held its breath. They had seen what happened when people talked back. Gabe? He wasn't backing down. The moment everything changed, Ray leaned forward, tapping the table with his fingers. "I don't think you understand," he said slowly. "You're in our town now, and people who don't show respect." His hand shot out, grabbing Gabe's coffee and pouring it onto the floor. "Get taught a lesson." A hush fell over the diner. Anna's hands shook as she clutched the coffee pot. Harold shuffled in his seat, looking away. "And Gabe?" He exhaled slowly, placed his hands flat on the table, and then he stood. Ray smirked. He thought he'd won. Until Gabe grabbed his wrist and twisted. Ray's face contorted in shock as he was wrenched forward, his balance breaking. In a blink, Gabe slammed him face first into the table. The diner erupted into chaos. A fight against the odds. The first man lunged at Gabe, but Gabe ducked, grabbed his collar, and sent him crashing into a booth. Another swung wildly. Gabe blocked, countering with a brutal elbow to the ribs. Dishes shattered. Chairs scraped violently against the floor. Anna screamed. Ray, still dazed, pushed himself up, fury burning in his eyes. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," he spat. Gabe rolled his shoulders. "Then come make me regret it." Ray charged. Gabe didn't hesitate. One punch to the gut. A sharp jab to the jaw. A swift kick that sent Ray stumbling back, gasping. Ray's men, the ones still standing, suddenly weren't so confident. For the first time in years, they weren't in control. The power of a town that's had enough. As Ray staggered, a voice cut through the chaos. "That's enough." Everyone turned. Harold, the old trucker, the man who had been silent for too long, stood. And then, Anna stepped forward. Then the cook. Then another customer. One by one, the people of Hudson Creek stood. Ray wiped blood from his lip, looking around, realizing he was outnumbered. Gabe, breathing hard but standing tall, narrowed his eyes. "You don't own this town." Ray hesitated. For the first time, fear flickered in his gaze. Then, the sirens. Squad cars pulled up outside, their lights flashing against the diner windows. The sheriff stepped in, hand on his holster. He looked at Ray, then at Gabe, then at the town standing behind him. And this time, he made the right call. Ray and his men were cuffed, dragged out into the rain. And just like that, the red vultures had fallen. The dawn of something new. The diner was silent. Then, slowly, applause. Anna wiped a tear from her cheek, her voice shaking. "You did it!" Harold chuckled, shaking his head. "Nah, he just reminded us we could do it too." Gabe exhaled, rolling his sore shoulder. For the first time in a long time, he felt lighter. A waitress placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of him. On the house. He nodded, took a sip, and for the first time in years, it tasted like victory. If you believe in standing up for what's right, drop a comment to support Gabe and hit that like button. This may be the end of one fight, but some battles never truly end. Subscribe for more stories where courage and justice take center stage. The end of one battle, the beginning of a new chapter. If you believe in standing up for what's right, fighting back against injustice, and never giving up, then hit that like button, drop a comment to support the character, and subscribe. This story may be ending, but justice never sleeps. Stay tuned for more stories that remind us all that courage isn't just about winning. It's about never backing down. The morning after the storm. The sun rose over Hudson Creek, spilling golden light over the streets that had once been ruled by fear. But today, it felt different. In Miller's diner, the aftermath of the previous night still lingered. Broken chairs, shattered dishes, and the echoes of a fight that had changed everything. The air smelled of coffee and victory, a mix of relief and quiet triumph that no one dared to speak too loudly about. Gabe Lawson sat at his usual booth, a fresh cup of coffee in front of him. His knuckles were bruised, his muscles sore, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. Across the diner, people whispered, glanced his way. Not with fear, not with pity, but with something different. Respect. Anna, the waitress who had once been too afraid to meet his gaze, approached with a small smile. "On the house," she said, nodding to his coffee. Gabe chuckled, lifting the mug. "Gonna put me out of business, giving me free coffee every day." Anna's smile grew. "You earned it." He took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle inside him. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just passing through. He belonged. The town that refused to stay silent outside. The people of Hudson Creek moved with a newfound energy. They had seen what happened when someone fought back, when someone refused to bow. And now, they weren't afraid anymore. Harold, the old trucker who had once stayed silent, stood on the corner talking to a group of locals. Planning. Organizing. A sign was already being nailed onto the diner's front door. No more fear, no more silence. Tom, the sheriff, once reluctant to go against the Red Vultures, had been forced to take action. With the gang dismantled, their leader behind bars, and the town finally reclaiming its voice, change was coming. And it had all started with one man refusing to look away. Lessons to take from this story. Gabe never set out to be a hero. He was just a man who had lost too much, seen too much, and was tired of running. But that's the thing about life. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It throws challenges at you, tests you, and dares you to fight back. And in the end, the only question that matters is, will you stand up, or will you stay silent? Here's what we can all learn from Gabe's journey. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about acting even when you're afraid. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with one person willing to make a stand. The hardest battles aren't always fought with fists. They're fought with conviction, persistence, and refusing to let fear control you. Sometimes, all it takes to inspire others is to show them that standing up is possible. Life will always test you. It will put obstacles in your way, knock you down, and see how much you can take. But the truth is, you are stronger than you think. And when the moment comes, will you be ready to fight for what's right? The story continues. Gabe's fight wasn't just about one night in a diner. It was about what came next. The people of Hudson Creek had taken their first steps toward reclaiming their home. The battle wasn't over, but they had won the first victory. And as Gabe sat there, sipping his coffee, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't done yet, because some fights, they're worth fighting until the very end. If this story inspired you, if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button and comment to support Gabe. Share your thoughts. What would you have done in his place? And don't forget to subscribe. More stories of courage, justice, and resilience are coming your way. Because the world needs more people like Gabe. People who refuse to back down.